Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome everybody here today. My name is Tom Dixon. I'm here working with the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. I'd just like to welcome everybody to this press conference. Speakers will be available for interview directly after this presentation and also over the duration of COP. So please do reach out if we can give further representation. We have representatives here from 50 countries around the globe, here in Montreal as part of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity, and they will be partaking in all the negotiations. Before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge that we do meet here today on unceded Mohawk territory. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague Kate, who will welcome us to Montreal, to this beautiful city. So thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thanks everyone for being here and for joining us today. I'd like to start off, of course, with a land acknowledgement, acknowledging that we are currently located on unceded Ganawake Mohawk territory. The Indigenous peoples are recognized as the custodians of the land and water on which we gather today. We respect the continued connections with past, present, and future in our relationship with this land and its original peoples. Although these are not my personal traditional homelands, I am so grateful to welcome you all today here to Canada. My name is Kate Gillis. I'm a member of the Métis Nation, and I'm so happy to be here supporting the great work and celebrating the great work that is being done by Indigenous peoples on biodiversity, and specifically these great folks that have been doing this work for years, generations, centuries. Yes, so thank you very much for joining us.
Many thanks, Kate. So for the format of today's panel, you're going to hear first of all from the co-chairs of the Indigenous Caucus, and also then other representatives from the rest of the regions around the world. So I'd like to first of all hand over to co-chair Ramiro Batson.
Gracias, buenas tardes a cada uno de ustedes para el Foro Internacional Indígena de Biodiversidad. Es un gusto poder brindar esta conferencia de prensa que permita dar a conocer que para los pueblos indígenas los conocimientos tradicionales y los aportes que desarrollan a la conservación de la biodiversidad son fundamentales para el marco global del post-2020. Los pueblos indígenas estamos planteando que este marco global post-2020 debe reconocer en una justa dimensión el tema de los derechos humanos, particularmente el tema de los derechos de los pueblos indígenas. Estos deben de estar en consonancia con los instrumentos internacionales, particularmente con la Declaración de las Naciones Unidas sobre Derechos de los Pueblos Indígenas. En este punto quiero detenerme y plantear que para los pueblos indígenas el consentimiento libre, previo e informado es fundamental para desarrollar las acciones, ¿sí?, los objetivos, las metas y los indicadores que el post-2020 está planteando. De ahí es que los pueblos indígenas planteamos que se debe respetar, reconocer y poner en práctica el consentimiento libre, previo e informado. De esta manera los pueblos indígenas podrán seguir desarrollando sus acciones, sus contribuciones y poder mantener sus territorios donde se conserva y alberga el 80% de la biodiversidad. Mateo Chivé, gracias.
Muchas gracias, Ramiro. I'd now like to hand over to our second co-chair, Lucy Molenke. Lucy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I just want to bring up a few issues, just to add to what Ramiro has said. As Indigenous peoples and local communities, we are really grateful to be here. And we bring our voices from the ground, from the country level, from the local level. And that's why we are here participating at the international level to be able to bring the issues on top of the agenda of the global biodiversity framework. And at the same time, we know that during this Conference of Parties, the 15th Conference of Parties, there are other issues that are going to be discussed, Article 8J and related provisions, issues of protected areas, and of course, we also the COP of the Nagoya Protocol, which is also very crucial to us. All these things that are being discussed are important, and they are related to the framework. And for us is to make sure that, as what Ramiro has said, a human rights approach is very important for the governments, especially to understand that there are no decisions that can be made without indigenous peoples and local communities, because we've been really participating and really following up the process all throughout, doing lots of meetings and gathering to make sure that we bring our issues on the table. It's also very important to know that after the post 2020, which we are very hopeful that it will be passed and everything will go on, there is a second phase of the implementation process again, which we want to bring at the forefront to tell the government, to tell the stakeholders, the key players, and even the UN process that we are here as indigenous peoples and local communities, and we want to be included in those decisions and even in the implementation of the framework. Because without including us to give our voices and to make decisions, that may not be as effective as possible. So it's important to bring up a number of issues that we already have on the ground that most of the communities most of the people don't understand why we are bringing them up. So I think this is very crucial, and we hope that we have quite a number of indigenous people and local communities around whom you as journalists and also as partners can follow them up. We have a number of over 50 countries they've come from 50 countries, and it's very important to follow up with us and then follow with them also and get as much as we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I'd now like to hand over to Lakpa Nordi Sherpa, our third co-chair.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to co-chairs for highlighting the messages from IAFB. I would like to just start by saying that this, the vision of CBD of living in harmony with nature, it's very much embedded in the way of life of indigenous people. So it's not something very different for indigenous peoples. And it is very important for post-2020 global biodiversity framework to really enhance these relational values of nature and peoples together with the culture very much strongly. And there are so many, the good practices, the customary traditional values that indigenous peoples are doing all over the world that are very key to the problem that we are discussing in the CBD. And I would like to also share that I think in the context of climate change, there was research done in terms of how much indigenous peoples are getting support financially to do the actions that they are doing in the ground. And it's very, very little. And that's quite surprising to the people who are protecting the 80% of the biodiversity are receiving less than 1% of the financial support. And I am sure this is the case in the context of the conservation of biodiversity as well. Indigenous peoples are receiving very little support. And there is a very good opportunity actually for parties in post-2020 to strongly embed that aspect for the need to support the local actions of indigenous peoples. And one of the things that I would like to highlight concretely and as a message from our end is that we should see the human rights and the rights of indigenous peoples as solutions to the problems that we are all discussing. It should not be seen as a barrier, because there are so many challenges that human rights defenders, indigenous women human rights defenders, and the defenders that are working day and night in the ground are having a lot of problems and challenges. Despite that, we're continuing the struggle to defend the homes that we live in. So I really hope all of you, the journalists here and the civil society and also the parties, to really put that perspective to look indigenous peoples as rights holders, as leaders, and also as partners to the conservation of all the discussion that we're having. And to conclude, I would like to remind everybody that we should not keep learning the lessons. And I think we have learned lessons from the Aichi targets where many of the targets were not achieved. And one of the factors that missed opportunity in that lessons is that the roles and contributions of indigenous peoples were almost invisibly reported to the Convention on Biological Diversity. And I think we need to change that. And to change that, I think there is a very big opportunity for all of us to strongly push the human rights-based approach in the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So I'll just stop there. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Lakpa. I'd like to hand next to Aslak, please.
Joo, puerre päivi. Mulla on skuvlalema asla 4 asla ja jomna shaila 4 asla puhutaan New Yorkissa tienuleis. So good day everybody, my name is Aslak Holmberg, I'm the president of the Sami Council and here I represent the Arctic socio-cultural region. I am a fisherman myself and in 2017 Finland and Norway passed legislation which made it illegal for me to fish. Excuse me. So it was not possible for me to fish salmon as I have grown up doing, and it's key to our food security and our culture. Now for years I've been fishing and looking over my shoulder for the fishing patrol if they show up and if they come to confiscate our boat or give us fines or take our equipment when I'm fishing with my father or myself. And this is one example from the Arctic, but all too common in the indigenous world is criminalization of our traditional livelihoods and our customary practices. And our cultures depend on sustainably using our environments or living together with our environments and the species that are there, including wild species. So in this work with the global biodiversity framework, one aspect that we are focusing on is ensuring that there are safeguards in place that ensure that our traditions, our customary practices will not be criminalized. So this is something that we are focusing on, especially in targets 5 and 9. So work to ensure that our rights will not be violated, because we call for parties to work together with us and protect and ensure that our customary practices that it remains possible for us to maintain our traditions, because we think this is really part of the solution. We have our sustainable ways of life, livelihoods, practices, and these are definitely part of the solution in this bigger picture of biodiversity conservation. So we have to ensure that conservation practices will not have negative impacts to sustainable livelihoods of indigenous peoples. So this is what I wanted to highlight regarding customary sustainable use, which is one of our key issues here. So Kiitu, thank you very much.
Many thanks, Aslak. And staying within the region, but moving to Arctic Russia, I'd like to ask Chief Shadrin to please take the floor.
Hello everybody, my name is Vyacheslav Shadrin. I am a Grand Chief of Yukagir people from the northeastern part of Russia. My people is closely connected with nature, with our waters, animals and trees. For example, in my homeland, I have a tree, my twin brother, and my relatives who lives at that place look to this tree and know about me, what's happened with me, about my health. And I relate with this tree. This tree is feel me. And I'm feel this tree too. And we are here to find solutions. We know that nature can't be wrong. All the wrong which happen is happened by the human actions. And we are here to find solutions how to help to our nature, how to help to our peoples, to all human in our world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. Some very wise words there. We have another panelist as well who I'm afraid, because the world covers a lot of regions, we couldn't quite all fit into our 5 spaces. So could I invite Ruth Spencer, please, to come and join us? Ruth is representative of our local communities from Antigua Barbuda and has been doing some really tremendous work. Thank you, Ruth. You have the floor.
Good afternoon. It's good to be here, and I hope our coming together can inspire you of actions that we can do to meet the GBF goals. As the other partner saying, this is something that's ongoing for us. It's not new for us. In my territory, in my little island, I work with the local groups. I empower them. I teach them about the conventions, not just biodiversity convention. I teach them about chemicals, waste, climate impacts, because when you work with people in the communities, all these things are taking place. But our community groups are what hold the governments accountable. So we have to build up their strength in advocacy. They are like the alarmists in our communities. They see what's happening. They see what harm is happening to the environment. And they cannot see it happening and not do nothing. We live in small islands and we are impacted by development. Lots of investors come to our islands to build hotels, and in so doing, they are destroying some of our coastal areas where our wetlands are, where our mangroves are, and those are what protect us. So we as local groups, we have to sound the alarm. We have to have bold advocacy, and we have to stand up to defend the environment. So when I come to these meetings and share my stories, I want to inspire you to work with us. You know, let's develop partnerships, collaborations, so that we can meet these goals. We have to operate in an inclusive spaces. The information and knowledge, the capacity building is not just for the governments. You have to empower the local groups. We have important work to do. So we are here to share with you and to ask you to work with us, support us in the various regions, because we are really determined to enable the CBD to meet the goals and targets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth, for those very inspiring words, as always. That does close our panelists, but I would very much like to open up the floor for questions. I believe there are a couple of mics around if anybody would like to go up to the mics to ask a question. Jack Graham from Reuters first. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Jack Graham from the Thomson Reuters Foundation. I was wondering, I heard a Canadian Indigenous leader say that they were thinking about how they could leverage the 30 by 30 goals. So I was wondering whether new forms of conservation might be able to support communities economically and potentially reward Indigenous communities for work and local communities for work they're already doing. Do you have any views on this? And what do you think are the key barriers to making that happen at COP15?
I can answer that because one of my community groups in Antigua, they have developed a conservation park, and it's not in a declared protected areas, but it contributes so much to biodiversity. We have pollinators, we have butterflies, we plant the native trees, we develop stone ponds. There's a lot of traditional knowledge invested in that park, and we are hoping soon that it can become a national park. It's a place of health and wellness. People from around the island, they come there. You know, when you enter there, you just feel that health and wellness situation. So I have already started to draft an OECM for that little community, because that's a very important contribution to meeting target 3. And as I work with groups, but the stuff is, this is something that I can do that the government cannot do, because I've been with these groups. I know their history, I know their knowledge, I know what they're doing. So I can document it. And there are certain type of activities that only we on the ground can really develop these case studies and these knowledge management products. So it's possible, and credit should be given to them for already being creative, seeing the need to do something with lands that were degraded and turning them into livable, lovely national parks for people and the environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Does somebody else want to come in there?
Maybe I would like to contribute to this. Thank you for that questions. Just would like to start the point that you said, barriers, like the problems. I think one of the challenges that we see, and just also Ryoko, our sister, said, conservation is something very much embedded into the way of life of indigenous peoples. And this is not something, again, new. This has been practiced by indigenous peoples in the way they manage their lands, territories, and resources. With that, I think it's really the mindset, how you look nature, right? If you disconnect people, nature, then there's always a problem that, okay, nature has to be put it outside. You put a fence with that and kick the peoples out. And I think that is the major problem when it comes to the discussion on conservation. And to address that, like I said, the rights and the human rights of indigenous peoples should be at the center of the solutions. Because I'm sure you have read a lot of evidence-based research, global witness report that is, telling what's the wrong that's happening in the ground, why indigenous peoples are being criminalized, like our friend from Sami said. And also in the region that I come from, the way people look at, and it's like looking land as a physical, but for indigenous peoples, there's a lot of spirituality connected to it. There's a lot of cultural values, the cultivation of the knowledge through the knowledge systems. And these things are completely separated when the conservation thing happens. And the problem is, again, it's always bottom up. And that's where the problem lies, because when the solution comes from top, they don't really know the realities in the ground. And the solution doesn't become a solution. Solution is bringing painful experiences, evictions, human rights violations, and those things has to be stopped. Those things has to be corrected. And again, like coming back to the target 3, of course there is a risk, but then there's also a big opportunity for actually how can we undo in a way the past experiences that we have. And for me personally, if we can really embed the human rights of indigenous peoples, put their epic and really see indigenous peoples as leaders of conservation. Because even if you feel a strong language and rights, and if you don't have a mindset of looking indigenous peoples with mutual respect and trust, in the implementation, what really happens is like, you cannot really carry that spirit of a true partnership or equal partnership. So for me, I think it's really the mindset you look towards indigenous people's way. And you don't really treat us like a children. No? You have to do this, you have to do that, you have to be always taken care of. I think we have the capacity to take care of ourselves. And I think for me, it's really the mindset and the way you look towards our spirituality, our value systems. And I think that has to be as much as possible addressed at different levels.
Thank you very much, Lakpa. I'm very conscious of time, and I did see some more hands go up. Ben first, I think.
I just
Lucy.
I just wanted to add on what Lakpa has just talked about, and the question of recognition of indigenous peoples who are within that protected areas, within that land, is very, very crucial. Because most of the time, as Lakpa said, is a question of not recognizing that there are people already there, and that's their land, and they've been protecting the nature there. The nature also knows its own people because they've been working together. They've been living together in harmony among themselves. And when you separate that and you don't recognize those communities there, it means also you are not recognizing the nature. And it's something else that has to come in. So what we are saying, a human rights approach that he has indicated, recognition and respecting the rights of indigenous people and local communities who are around there is very, very crucial. And that's what we keep on emphasizing on. Even though we are quiet on looking at how it's being discussed, our main important thing is to make sure that respect, recognition, and the rights of those indigenous people is really taken into consideration. Let's come from the ground, from the top where that nature is, and go, because we cannot just start from there. There is the air, but we need that nature which is down there with us, with our lands. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Lucy. I think we have time for maybe 2 very quick questions, one from Ben, one this side at the front.
Hello. Yeah, Ben Powless with Canadian Geographic. So I guess I'm just wondering if anybody else wants to build on the point that Aslak was bringing up. What are the threats to perhaps practices in your territories that Indigenous peoples are doing to preserve biodiversity and conservation if there are no guarantees on human rights and Indigenous rights out of this kind of framework agreement?
For us in the Caribbean, for example, the threat from development, when you speak out about it, you're harassed, you're called names. And in Latin America and some other parts of the world, the environmental defenders are killed. We have this new agreement called the Escazú Agreement my government has ratified, which gives us a right to access information, to consultations, but sometimes those consultations don't take place, and the gaps that in knowledge that the local people have many times are not in these particular project and project documents. So that's the threat we face, you know, your personal life being at risk.
Okay, I'm very sorry about this, but if you don't mind, can we hold your question until we walk outside that door just there? Because there was one last intervention I wanted to invite Chrissy Grant to speak as well on behalf of the Pacific, just a couple of closing remarks for this. And I do know I'm conscious of time that we have to leave. All of our panelists will be available for half an hour just outside here at the front of the media centre. I will also be available for interview bookings as well. So, Chrissy, please, you have the floor.
Yes, I just wanted to build on what Lakpa was talking about and others about the threat to Indigenous peoples and the threat around 30 by 30. They are very concerned in a number of different countries across Latin America, Central America, Asia, Africa, that the 30% protection of land could result in, sort of a play for economic gain by governments and parties rather than for conservation of biodiversity. And that's a really big threat for them, and they are really, really concerned about that. So I think we need to be really clear about what that 30 by 30 is about, what it means when we say 30% protection of land and waters, but more so land because it also affects people as well as animal and plant species that the Indigenous people would rely on. It's part of their identity, their sort of being, and so it needs to have careful consideration by parties at this meeting to identify and define what that 30% means. It's for conservation. It's for the management of conservation and ecosystems. It's not for, sort of building theme parks to get economic gain and things like that.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Chrissy. And I'm very sorry, we are going to have to leave it there. The UN's goal by 2050 is that we are living in harmony with nature. I think one of the key messages for me working with this wonderful caucus is that there are many people who've been living in harmony with nature for a very long time, and it has worked perfectly well. So let's listen to them. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. We'll see you outside the front if you have more questions.